All right, guys, what's going on? It's Halsey Schider with the Helicopter Podcast, and this is a special edition. I'm kind of like seeing it in my head right now when you're watching like your favorite sports game, and then all of a sudden the news breaks in. So this is a news flash. Today is going to be a little bit of a different episode. It's being released, obviously, as you're probably noticing, out of schedule. So this has just been something that kind of came across the desk. I have a sales rep that works for my brokerage, Helicopter. His name is Wesley Rhodes. And he said, hey, man, I've been flying around with this guy that's won the primary to be a congressman in the 10th district of North Carolina. And I think it would be cool if you chatted with him on the podcast specifically about what's going on in North Carolina right now regarding the recent hurricane and then all the helicopter efforts. So joining the podcast today, not a helicopter guy, but he's officially now logged 3 hours flying in a helicopter. Pat Harrigan, who's running for Congress in the 10th District of North Carolina. Welcome to the Helicopter Podcast. How are you?
Halsey, I'm great. Thanks for having me today.
Is this like, I don't know how it works when you run for Congress. I'm guessing you probably pinpoint some podcasts and things that you want to be on. I'm guessing that we might have not been on the radar for your campaign?
You know, I got to say, as a fixed wing guy, no, you haven't been on my radar. But when Wes told me the opportunity was there and that you wanted to talk, I jumped at it because I have not done an aviation podcast at this point. So
well, I really appreciate it.
To do it.
I'm a little bit, I'm a little nervous. A, I've never talked to someone that's going to be in Congress. And B, it's kind of unique. I always just talk about helicopters, and I have like this mutual connection because helicopter pilots are just really good about talking about helicopters. You can ask my wife anytime I'm in a room with another helicopter pilot. It's just like, okay, they're just going to talk about helicopters. I'll sit in the corner. Yep. But I think this will be fun. And specifically, there's so much happening right now, and I'm day by day, I'm seeing it on social media. Regarding kind of what's going on in North Carolina. So that's the primary purpose, but let's just kind of rewind a little bit. Tell us a little bit about you, your background, obviously a fixed wing guy. I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Totally.
And I also want to hear about this crazy idea of running for Congress and what that's all about.
Yeah, I'll give you the couple minute story here. So I grew up splitting time between San Diego out on the West Coast and a little small town in Wyoming. Kind of had the best of both worlds growing up. About 1,200 people up there. So I got an appointment to West Point and I went to the academy. I really wanted to fly, but I just felt the calling to go into the infantry, felt that that's where I was supposed to be. Did all of my initial training down at Fort Benning, which included infantry basic and ranger school, and then got stationed in Alaska up at Fort Wainwright, just south of the Arctic Circle.
Wow.
I spent 3 years up there, but after the first year, took my platoon to Afghanistan and took over a very small air access only combat outpost. And so air access only, you probably know what that means on this podcast. There's no roads getting there. It's way back in the boonies. It was north of Kandahar up in the Arghandab Valley, very nasty place. But as a young 23-year-old, I had about 400 people underneath me, no boss on top of me for 70 miles. And it was kind of create your own adventure. Had 40 Americans, about 350 Afghans, and we were all co-located on one small little outpost. And everything in or out happened by air. So every day interacting with helicopters or fixed wing that were dropping bundles and conducting operations. It was a very traditional special forces mission. And having the opportunity to do that at 23 years of age in the infantry was something that was really special. And I came home and I said to my wife, honey, I think I'm really called to go into the special forces. And she said, "No, you're not, Pat. that's not
Yeah,
what you're
that was a
doing.
misdial.
That's not it." But she relented, and we moved to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, after I passed Special Forces selection to go through the Special Forces qualification course back in 2013. And so went through that course, simultaneously started a business when I was in service. And that business focused kind of on the supply chain side of the firearms and defense industry. So we linked domestic manufacturing capability with production line demands on large weapons manufacturers' floors, and kind of grew that in parallel with my service. And I ended up getting stationed at Fort Bragg after graduating the qualification course. So I took a team almost immediately right back to Afghanistan, my Special Forces team, out of Bagram. And at that point in time, Afghanistan really started to go downhill. The surge was over, and we were down to about 8,000 troops or so. Writing was kind of on the wall for what ultimately ended up happening in Afghanistan. But it was a very, very difficult time, very violent time in Afghanistan. But because we were on Bagram, we were the only team on Bagram. We were the only Special Forces team in the country that had absolutely dedicated assets, basically whatever we wanted and needed. And so we were flying all the time, everywhere. It was great. Learned a lot during that year, or during that 6 months, 7 months, and came back and decided that it was time for me to leave. Our business had grown to the point where it was an easy transition out. And so over the last 7 years, we have been building our domestic manufacturing company. We're sitting here in our 120,000 square foot facility that we 7 years ago started in our double wide trailer outside of Fort Bragg.
Nice.
So it's been one heck of a journey, Halsey. But when you get into manufacturing, all your money goes into machines and not into aircraft. So
Sure.
At least in the initial bunch of years, right? So I'm heavy on machines, light on aircraft. But we've had a ton of fun. We were just going to continue to grow our business, and then the fall of Afghanistan happened, and that's when I got very politically involved. I had no intention of ever getting involved in politics, but I really could not reconcile how we allowed our country to do that, not just to the next generation of Americans that will now have to fight because of our strategic weakness, because that weakness breeds conflict. Strength repels it, right? But also to the rest of the free world. And I said, you know what? We got to do something about these failed leaders who are leading us down the road to failed outcomes. Got to hop in, and here we are. So.
I mean, look, it's not a political show, but I mean, you're truly joining, you don't want to. I always said, I feel like people should join, a political movement, and it should not be like a great thing, it really is a public service, right? And it's obviously very apparent that this was not something that you necessarily thought you would do. I want to talk about that and about,
Sure.
Obviously, I have just questions about Congress and things like that. And then, of course, we'll get to the helicopter stuff. But real quick, because it ties back into helicopters, is a lot of our listeners are young guys and gals that are trying to figure out their path. And one of the paths is the military.
Yeah.
And there's a couple aviation ways to go in the military. You can join the military and fly, or you can join the military, do something else. And then once you're out of the military, use your GI Bill in order to have the VA effectively pay for most, if not all, of your flight training, either on the airplane or the helicopter side. You have to be going to a school that's with a college. There's some type of accreditation, a 141 flight program, all those things. But it's a really cool thing that our veterans are able to use. To those guys and gals that are kind of teetering on this idea of joining the military, what would you say to them to encourage them to maybe explore further the military, what they can expect in going into the military, and what can make them excel, whether they're an aviator or non-aviator in the military?
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
I think one of the best things about the military, from my experience, is the people. There's just it's a certain type of people with a certain type of mentality where you're around a bunch of winners. It's really that simple. And when you're around a bunch of people that are goal oriented, type A personality, they want to win. Some amazing things happen. You get to have some amazing experiences, and you don't settle for less. You never do. You're always trying to better your position, no matter what it is. Get better at your trade or your skill, better your fighting position. And that mentality is just pervasive throughout every military service that we have. I think that's one of the most special things about service is you just get to go into a high impact environment that has the right perspective and focus on things more often than not. But the experiences that you get to have while you're in the military are also very special. Everybody that I know that was in the military, doesn't necessarily like it while they're going through. Some things are very difficult. I mean, overall you enjoy it, right? But some things are tough. But the farther that you get from those things in your life, the more fondly that you look back on them. And the more that you realize, particularly as you mature and grow older, the more you realize how formative those experiences were. Not just for how you see the world today, but who you are as an individual is formed in those in extremis environments that, quite frankly, aren't found outside of the military. So when I stepped back after 7.5 years in the military as a 29.5-year-old, when I got out, there was no one that I graduated high school as a former special operator and gone here, gone there, done all this. There was no one that I went to high school with that had the breadth of experience that I did, that was ready to tackle the next phase of their life with certainty, with confidence, and I wouldn't trade anything for that.
Yeah, I mean, talk about leadership experience accelerated. 23 years old, leading 400 people in a military zone. That's not a common narrative. And I think it's fantastic. Obviously, it takes a special person too. Listening to your resume here, you're obviously quite the go-getter, and that's incredible. When you make a decision to say, "Hey, I want to try to make a difference again and serve again, but in a different fashion now with Congress," how does that even work? How do you even begin to start running for office like that?
It's a harder decision, I'll tell you, Halsey, and because as you get older, you know what things mean more than when you're younger. When you're 18 and you're like, I want to go into the military, I feel called to go do this. You have no idea what you're getting into at the end of the day. You really don't. You can read all the books you want. You can talk to all the different people that have been in the military, but until you actually go, you don't know what you're getting into. You just don't have the life experience to be able to kind of piece the pieces of the puzzle together ahead of time. You build that puzzle as you go along. As you get older, you can start putting the pieces of the puzzle together before you actually have those experiences. I think it's one of the gifts that our Creator has given us in the form of wisdom as we get a little bit older. So I know what I'm getting into now. This is not something that as I said earlier, I wanted to do. This is something I feel compelled to do at this point because I've got 2 little girls now, and I see that look in their eyes, which is I'm so excited to wake up and live this day and have these new experiences that are going to be incredible. And they don't know the dark side of life. They don't know what can happen. They don't understand the concepts of freedom and democracy and
Sure.
free markets and merit-based exceptional. Like, they don't understand any of that. They just know what exists. They have no idea that it needs to be perpetuated and that it was earned and that it doesn't just happen on its own. And this world can be a very, very dark place if we let it become that. And so I know what I'm stepping into right now. I'm not looking forward to it, but for my kids' sake, for your kids or grandkids, whoever might be listening, I just don't feel like I want to be part of the first generation of Americans that leaves less opportunity to the next. We've never done that in American history before, and the world's in a very precarious place right now.
Yeah, it's crazy. I really admire that. What has it been like? Obviously you're running a business. I'm guessing you have to go and campaign and meet people and introduce yourself. What was it like getting through the primary, and what has it been like leading up to the election for you?
It's been an incredible education. I talked about the different pieces of the puzzle. When you are running for Congress or a federal position, you get to see all the different individual pieces of the puzzle that come together to make the entire picture that is our way of life, the United States of America, everything that it stands for. It is really cool to see it from a high level view and understand that each and every person impacts everyone else, and how everything that we do is all completely interconnected. That's a very, very special thing. And so it is something that I try to inculcate and then give back and spread that knowledge and that information to people that, may only see kind of this portion of the puzzle, because we all get that way, right? Like I get that way in my business. We get consumed with our sliver of the pie.
100%.
And we don't get to step back and see the bigger picture, think beyond ourselves. Like as Americans, we're very selfish individuals, right? We are. That's human nature. But with the level and quality of life that we have, the level of materialism that we have, it's very easy for us to just get tunnel visioned on us. So getting to step back and really help people see the bigger picture, and that they're a part of that, and that they're a very valuable part of that, is actually one of the most rewarding parts of the job, because you get to open people's eyes and you get to open people's minds, and then you find that you're building coalitions and you're working on the same team towards the same objectives and creating momentum.
Yeah, it's incredible, man. Really neat. It's cool to talk to you, actually. I just never, I don't think I've talked to too many people that are running for office. And so I'm excited. I'm not in North Carolina, obviously.
It's really a good thing, also. You're not missing much.
I'm not in North Carolina, so I'll be rooting from you from a distance here. But
yeah, thank you.
Now to go to kind of the purpose of our special edition podcast for today. I know that recently, again, I'm in Oregon, right? So it's like I feel like I'm a lifetime away sometimes from what's happening around the world and even around the country. And obviously the devastation of this recent hurricane has been at a major magnitude, and it still is. And helicopters have played a huge role. And a lot of those helicopters have been civilian use, whether they're private operators, private owners. I know that you were flying with Wesley. So I guess for people like me that aren't at the epicenter of what's going on, just fill us in on the storm itself. What made this storm so awful? And then I want to just talk about what's been happening specifically with the helicopters and how helicopters have actually aided in saving lives and helping people.
Yeah, so the storm itself was thought to be a much smaller storm than it ultimately ended up being at landfall, right? I think if we all look back a week ago, everybody was saying, the track was actually pretty accurate, the forecast. And I think there's going to be a lot of people looking back at that when, it comes time to finger point accountability. We're not there yet, right? We still got a lot of work to do, and we're fighting the fight right now. But I think the large majority of folks really thought that the impact was going to be along the Florida-Georgia coastline, and ended up being the mountains of Western North Carolina. And there's one very specific, or maybe two specific reasons for that. I would say the first is, number one, a lot of people thought that this was going to be a Cat 2 reducing down to a Cat 1 by the time it hit landfall, and it ended up accelerating up to a Cat 4. That was very problematic. And second, before that hurricane got to Western North Carolina, it had rained almost every day for the last week in Western North Carolina. And so when you layered that last week of rain on top of a now, weakening Category 4 hurricane, it just put all the ingredients in the right spot for a catastrophe. And that's exactly what has happened in the mountains of Western North Carolina. It has been a catastrophe.
When you say catastrophe, can you paint the picture a little bit? Like what are you seeing? Like what is landslides, flooding, all of that?
Yeah, you're seeing all of the above. Creeks that had a couple hundred cubic feet per minute. We're running at 200,000 cubic feet per minute.
Wow.
Yes. I mean, you're talking about a lot of water in a significant delta in water, right? Like a massive change over a short period of time that created utter devastation in the valleys of Western North Carolina. And so you had you have entire towns that are gone. They're just not there anymore. Chimney Rock is one of them. The Lake Lure area. You fly over that right now, and it is some of the worst devastation I've ever seen. My last deployment to Afghanistan, we had a 7.4 earthquake while I was there, and in kind of the northeastern part of the country. You know, these mud houses don't do great in a 7.4 earthquake.
I'm sure.
It's very similar to that devastation. And in Afghanistan, I think about 3,000 people died during that. I would not be shocked if that ultimately ends up being about the number out here. Just from what I'm seeing and what I'm looking at and the reports I'm hearing on the ground.
It's horrendous. I mean, it really sounds like a perfect storm, right? The perfect events leading up. The ground's already saturated. You're kind of on your laurels a little bit because it's forecasted to go down. I'm not a meteorologist, but I know a little bit about weather, and it's typically the case, right? It makes landfall. You're not having that moisture strengthen it anymore. So it's just one of those horrible events that hopefully we can learn from. I'm interested to hear from your perspective the timeline of like storm passes, confirmed, very bad, very catastrophic, lots of damage. When did it start becoming apparent that there is now a legion of private helicopter owners and operators that were gung-ho to come and support this rescue effort?
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI Heli Expo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.
Yeah, let me maybe back up just a little bit, right?
Please.
So the storm hit Thursday night, Friday morning, and I actually drove on Friday morning, attempted to drive out to Asheville. I'm in Hickory, North Carolina, and Asheville's about an hour and 10 minutes west through a mountain pass. I wanted to go out there because, it's really hard to get into the VA. So I had a appointment scheduled at the very end of October, but I knew that because of the storm was going to be kind of bad, that a lot of people were going to cancel their appointments, and I might be able to slide in. So I decided to kind of brave the storm and go, which I realized very quickly was a mistake, and that the storm really was presenting a life-threatening environment to Western North Carolina. And I did throw a chainsaw in the back of my truck just to be sure, and I did need to use it. We were going down 40 actually. I-40 got completely washed out by the French Broad that had overflowed, and then a massive mudslide came down and took out all lanes of I-40, both east and west.
Wow.
And that stopped traffic. I was about a mile from that slide when that happened, and ended up driving backwards on the highway and tried to get to Asheville a couple different ways just because I'm stubborn.
I was going to say, you're very persistent.
Going through the mountains. And that was an even, bigger mistake, because you'd go down one road and there'd be, down trees, down power lines, and you'd go back, try to hit another road. And by the time you'd turn around, there'd be a tree that fell behind you because the winds are just so strong. And the ground is so saturated, these trees are just falling over. The roots can't hold them, right? So very, very nasty environment. Took me, what would take me an hour and 10-minute drive, took me about 5 hours to not even get there and get back. And I just knew that this was going to be a lot worse than we had anticipated. As I was coming back from Old Fort, which is kind of about where the road went out, there was no one that had power all the way to my plant, which was 10 minutes west of Hickory. So basically 10 minutes west of Hickory. If you're familiar with North Carolina geography, everything west of that basically lost power.
Wow.
Across the whole state. And so truly a devastating storm, devastating consequences. And at that point, it kind of switched on in my mind. This is going to be a lot worse than I think anybody anticipated. And that's when people started to spring into action. Was really Friday afternoon. I would say that most people just kind of worked on getting themselves dug out, chainsawing and making sure that they could get on the roads and could kind of have their normal pattern of life. Saturday was the day that really everybody was like, whoa, we got a big problem here. We need to really get after this. In Western North Carolina, like, has anybody heard from them over there? So that's from the average North Carolinian's perspective. I think that's the kind of the timeline of how it went.
It's just wild. And yeah, I have a really close friend of mine, my wife and I, he lives in Asheville, and it was worrisome because we couldn't get a hold of him for a long time. I think it took 3 or 4 days before we heard. And I think it's because the cell service was knocked out. So it's very, very scary. And obviously just a big storm. Something that's unique about all this, though, is this isn't the first time, obviously, that there's been some type of devastating, natural disaster. It happens, right? It's part of living on Earth here. It happens all over the United States. In fact, my first helicopter job, Pat, outside of flight instruction, was flying around a volcano called Mount St. Helens. It was a giant eruption in 1980. I don't know how familiar you are with the Pacific Northwest, but this giant volcano. And that day it had the largest landslide, the largest tidal wave, because it pushed this lake 800 feet up. Right. And, it released 27,000 equivalent energy of atomic bombs and things. So it's Mother Nature. It's wild. And to see that destruction, flying a helicopter was a neat place to be, obviously many years later. But the difference is like this response. I have never seen a response from the civilian helicopter world like this. And I think I have a couple of thoughts.
Yeah.
First and foremost, unfortunately, some of our helicopter platforms on social media can be quite toxic. I don't know why, but it's just a thing. And it hasn't been for this. It's like everyone has put their differences and their toxicity and their trolling aside. And it's been like, hey, how can I help? What do you need? And then I also think there's a guy named Garrett Mitchell. I think Cletus McFarlane is kind of his YouTube handle. Obviously, very famous guy from his YouTube. He's gotten into helicopters with guys like Heavy D and other big influencers. And it seems like he's really spearheaded a lot of it. And so much credit to so many other people. But it seems like some of the bigger personalities within the private owners of helicopters. So, I mean, have you ever experienced anything like this where it's like this outpour of people coming together, specifically when it comes to helicopters? Like, I've never seen people rally like this for civil use aircraft.
No, I've never heard of anything like it before. And I'll tell you, I am telling everybody that I know that the best of America is currently on display in Western North Carolina.
100%.
Within the pilot community. I mean, and it's folks to kind of explain how big this is. There are over 60 civilian helicopters that are pulling a ton of weight that the government can't pull on its own. And they have run, as of this morning, they had run over 1,700 missions. As of this evening, they will be over 2,000 individual missions that run everything from recovery. They've recovered over, or evacuation. They've evacuated over 350 people. Supply pushes. Those are the majority of just providing life support up to the mountains that are completely cut off. Because you got to understand, in North Carolina mountains, you have all these different box canyons.
Sure.
These box canyons have one road, and that road is almost always crossing a river at the point it links up with the main road, and all those bridges are out. All these people in these box canyons are totally cut off, and helicopters are keeping these box canyons alive. And the people there able to at least stay, work on their homes, try to recover and rebuild here. And then you talked about this earlier, Halsey. a lot of people just haven't heard from anybody in a week, just doing simple welfare checks.
Yeah.
In conjunction with evacuation missions and supply missions, drop off these supplies, but hey, go see if these people are still there. Are they alive? Because nobody can get a hold of them. This has all been covered by private aviators that have just volunteered their time. They volunteered their assets. And, thanks to a number of nonprofits, including Operation Airdrop, they're getting their fuel paid for. But it is like going to the Hickory Airport right now is like going to Bagram Air Force Base and seeing all the helicopters that are on the deck. And the only difference is none of them are the same color of platform.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Right? But it really is. It's like a military base operating as a military unit. And everybody is just pitching in, doing everything they can to help. And it's the coolest thing I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, that's what makes, America great, really,
Yep,
is like this. And it's sad sometimes that it seems like really horrible things have to happen in order for all of us to remember, like, oh, hey, guys, we're on the same team here.
Yeah,
really.
We're all Americans, right?
Right. It's
Those
like
are our brothers and sisters out there.
It's just, it's insanity. But it is neat. It's not, of course, you don't want this to happen, but it gives me hope in people and society that, that America is still America, and Americans are still Americans, and they're doing the right things. When it comes to this, from a helicopter pilot perspective, from someone that's overly cautious like myself, I do have some concerns of, private owners, specifically private owners, not necessarily like the operator types, but the guys and gals that are wealthy individuals that have the means to afford helicopters, flying these missions. What has it been like to control kind of all those efforts? Who's coordinating? Are they kind of delegating certain helicopters and pilots to doing certain maybe easier missions, and maybe harder missions are left to more equipped, more experienced helicopter operators?
I've seen that happen on the fixed wing side. So in conjunction with what's going on at Hickory has become the hub. It is where all rotary wing activity is based out of on the private side. Statesville and Lincolnton to the east and the south of Hickory are the fixed wing hubs.
Okay.
And I have seen, from EAA, they've got folks out there that are kind of marshaling and they are issuing mission sets based off of pilots' capabilities. I have not really seen that too much out of Hickory. The biggest thing that I've seen practically, and understand, I'm a fixed wing guy, and just so people understand where I'm at, what my perspective is, which is still a fairly junior perspective. I just got my pilot's license about 4 months ago.
Nice, congrats.
Flying Cessna 182.
Sweet.
I'm working on my, IFR rating. Don't have it yet. I've got about 100.
We're gonna get you in a helicopter, Pat.
I know. Look, I've got three. I got 3 flight hours in. I got many hours in a helicopter.
Yeah,
jumping out of them, doing missions in them. But I've only got 3. With my hand on the stick. But I'm getting there.
Love that.
But I would say that the biggest consideration that I've seen is depending on the type of helicopter somebody's flying. Obviously in the Robbies, they're a little bit underpowered, and you need a little bit of that run room in order to get up and go, where you don't need that on some of the more capable turbine platforms. And so they are kind of, maybe that's the one area where they are saying, okay, hey, now that we're a week into this, we have a map of, confirmed and possible LZs, and there's more data flowing around what we're doing. Things are becoming a little bit more controlled every day is probably the right way to say it.
That's good. Yeah. And look, it's, even though I'm very cautious, and it does scare me to think that some of these guys might be doing missions that maybe they shouldn't be doing. It's like, there's lives at stake, right? This is kind of a unique situation, right? So it's like, sometimes the rationale has to kind of go out the back a little bit. And it does seem like things are very well coordinated. It seems like there's good communication, and, people are, I think, for the most part, minding P's and Q's. From what I'm hearing on the helicopter side, there's good radio communication. There's fairly good coordination. So it definitely seems like everyone has the mindset of safety, which is important. I think in disasters and in times like this, it's easy to like completely forget about safety. And then if you do that, then you just cause more issue, right? We
Yeah.
don't want to have to go and rescue a bunch of crashed aircraft. And to this point, I don't think there's really been any incidents or accidents that I'm aware of, which is pretty neat. It does, again, I'm in Oregon. I'm very far away from all this. And so you hear different reports, conflicting news. Some of the reports is like there isn't a large military presence. And I get the fact that right now it's not about like pointing fingers and who's doing what wrong and whatnot. But is there a military response happening in conjunction with these civilian helicopters? And did this take a little bit longer because they just weren't thinking it was going to be a big storm? What has it been? What's been your perspective on that?
This podcast is brought to you by Celicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Celicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Celicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-CELICOPTER, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@celicopter.com. Celicopter. List it, sell it, done.
Yeah, so there is a military presence here. I'll tell you that. I think that the biggest reason that there's all these questions surrounding who's doing what and when is the military just didn't do, and the National Guard side did not do a very good job of communicating, right? Like they're in their lane, they're focused on their lane, and they're just not communicating to the extent that people would have liked them to communicate. That is getting better every day. I can tell you that right now. And what has happened out at Hickory has made such an impact that they have now fallen underneath the Emergency Operations Center in Raleigh as a named mission set.
Wow.
And so they don't have operational control of them. They don't have administrative control of them, but they are absolutely tracking everything that is going on now. And there is direct communication with the Operations Center in Raleigh because it was so effective. And so I think when you think of something that just materialized out of a bunch of people that just decided to go do things and get stuff done, and that now is an indispensable part of the effort to evacuate and recover and resupply Western North Carolina, that tells you what kind of an overall impact has been made here. It has been one of the sweetest, like I said, it's one of the sweetest things I've ever seen. It's really the best of America on display. And I think people will look back at this and will say, man, that was one of the best times I ever had in my entire life. So I've encouraged everybody out there, because not a lot of them are military, right?
Yeah. Yeah, most
I
are.
just tell them, hey, guys, take a lot of pictures, because you're not going to get to do this forever. And you're going to look back on this 20 years from now, and you're going to be like, that was one of the best weeks of my life. And it was one of the most fulfilling. It was one of the most impactful. Like, I saved a lot of people's lives. I made a lot of people's lives easier. I helped jumpstart this process of recovering and rebuilding North Carolina. And that's something really special.
Something that I love about it too is the image, right? Helicopters have an image problem. Kobe Bryant, to name an incident that doesn't help our industry. Other issues, helicopters are noisy, they pollute. There's a lot of different agendas in which a lot of Americans don't love helicopters. And so I would hope from an incident like this that we can hopefully shine greater national attention on the efforts and the vital role that helicopters play in this specific scenario. And I think it would be great for Americans to know as well just how much helicopters are involved in just the daily economy, whether it's on the utility side, pipeline side, aerial survey, construction, air medical, so many different mission sets for helicopters. And we often just stew on the bad things, the bad accidents, the deaths, the noise, the complaints, whatever it may be. So I'm hoping that this gives helicopters like a little bit more credibility because they're truly wonderful machines. And it's an amazing machine specifically for missions like this, where you have to land in tight LZs. There's not a long runway like an airplane. You got to get in there and you got to get in and save lives. I mean, this is what helicopters were built for. And, Pat, I just appreciate you coming on a very non-traditional show for you, I'm sure, to just chat about this, not just yourself, but just the overall experience and how the civil helicopter world came together to help North Carolina out during this time. It's just really, really neat to hear Americans coming together like this.
Well, I'm glad to be here, and it was truly a privilege to even just be a part of it over there and help in the small ways that we could. I'm not elected yet, but I know a thing or two about how the military works, how the Guard works, and managing crises situations, and figuring out, okay, hey, how do we grease the skids on this thing in order to make it operate more efficiently? How do we get both sides more of what they want? How do we get them to collaborate with one another in order to increase the overall safety and the overall efficacy and outcomes of the mission sets that both sides are responsible for? But dang it, I just love seeing Americans roll their sleeves up, get to work, and get stuff done. And that's exactly what has happened here in the rotary wing community. It's been very special to be a part of. And it's definitely something that, as I finish my IFR rating on the fixed wing, I will continue to train with Wes.
Perfect.
And, go get my rating on.
How tall are you?
I'm 6'7".
Yeah, you're a giant dude.
I know. I have a really hard time. Y'all don't make aircraft my size, which is really frustrating. But even
I went to flight school. I had a buddy of mine. His name's Simon. He's a Norwegian guy. A lot of Europeans come over to the United States and train because it's so much cheaper. The FAA has better airspace regulations, things like that. And man, this guy was, I think, 6'7" too, and he would be in an R-22, and his knees would be like in his face. He's just so giant. So yeah, unfortunately, helicopters aren't necessarily built for big guys like yourself.
No, they aren't. But that's why it was.
But you can do it.
Yes, that's right. That's why when I was, in service, it was nice to get on them and get off of them as quick as possible.
Well, Pat, thank you so much for coming on. Good luck in the rest of your campaign. I know it's coming down to an end here shortly, and I'm hoping for a positive outcome for you. And, speaking for me as an American, it gives me hope that there's young people like you out there that don't necessarily want to serve just because it's a huge responsibility, but you have that calling too. And I think that's incredible. Obviously, you're a go-getter, and so I'm sure you'll be very successful, and it sounds like you already are. To our listeners, again, this was a bit of a special edition of the Helicopter Podcast. Thank you again to MHM Publishing and the Vertical Helicast platform for making this podcast what it is today. To all of our sponsors, to the OEMs, to Bell Helicopter, to Robinson Helicopter, the manufacturers that are making these helicopters. You guys are making tools that are saving lives, and they're saving lives this past week in North Carolina. And so we just have so much respect for you. And again, Pat, I know you're busy, so thank you so much for coming on. And to our listeners, we'll catch you on the next one. See you, Pat.
Thanks, Halsey. See ya.
Bell is proud to sponsor Vertical Helicasts and their vision to hold meaningful mission, safety, and best practice conversations in the helicopter industry. The lessons learned from these conversations will undoubtedly shape the future of both new and veteran helicopter operators.
Thank you to our sponsor, Vertical Aviation International. Are you ready for the largest vertical aviation show in the world? Verticon, formerly HAI Heli Expo, is coming to Dallas in March. With over 15,000 professionals and 600 companies in attendance, this is an event you don't want to miss. If you're interested in exhibiting, contact sales at verticalavi.org. That's sales at verticalavi.org. See you at Verticon.
This podcast is brought to you by Celicopter. Tired of listings that go nowhere? Exhausted by tire kickers who waste your time? Don't sell your helicopter alone. Celicopter handles the entire process from start to finish. So, if your helicopter is sat too long waiting for a buyer, contact the team at Celicopter today for your complimentary market valuation. Call 1-855-Helicopter, 1-855-735-5226, or email sales@helicopter.com. Helicopter. List it, sell it, done.